everybody. This is Mark Lambert here. I'm very happy that Gail Boyd asked me to come and do this jazz talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an American musician. I've been living in Brazil for the past 20 years. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, and I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to Berklee School of Music in the late 70s. Majored in composition, jazz guitar, film scoring. And then I moved back to the New York area and lived there for 20-something years and met my wife, who's a Brazilian woman, and she lived with me in New York until 2004. In 2004, we moved to Brazil, and I've been here since then. This year marks 20 years I've been in Brazil. 13 years in Rio de Janeiro, and the last 7 here in Sao Paulo. And the question is how I got into jazz. Who was the first jazz musician I remember hearing? I think the first jazz musician I remember hearing was Illinois Jacquet. My father was a big jazz aficionado, and he had this amazing collection of Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, Stan Kenton, all the great big bands. And I remember this Illinois Jacquet record live at Carnegie Hall. Started asking questions to my father, where does this music come from? Who are these guys? Because it wasn't music I heard on the radio, but I heard it in my house a lot, And he said, well, this is jazz. This was my pop music 20 years before you were born, And I started to go through all of his jazz collection and had amazing stuff and each one more incredible than the next. And ironically, at the same time, I started discovering some Brazilian music that he had in the house, which to me was totally from left field because I didn't know anything about Brazil or Brazilian music. And he had a little set of bongos. I think my mother went somewhere on vacation, maybe Puerto Rico or somewhere, and brought back these bongos. And I started playing along to these Brazilian records on the bongos. And he saw that I had a kind of a natural rhythm for it. So he asked me if I wanted to take drum lessons, and which I did. And that started my whole career, in jazz and music. And I started playing in bands as a rock drummer, and then switched over to guitar eventually and got into jazz. And but that first recording, I think till this day, I still remember, of Illinois Jacquet. And I remember asking my father about this music from Brazil because it had its own kind of swing. It was different than jazz and different than American pop. And he said, well, this comes from a country called Brazil. And I was like, well, where's that? And we had this big globe in the house that would spin. And he showed me, well, here's where we live in New Jersey. And if you go south past Florida, you pass the Caribbean, the equator, and down there is a country called Brazil. And I looked at it, it was enormous. I said, well, what's it like there? And he said, I have no idea. I've never been, but this music comes from there. And I thought to myself, man, what kind of cool people invented this kind of syncopated rhythm and harmony and not knowing that it would figure prominently in my future, and I end up living here with a Brazilian wife and a daughter who's half Brazilian, half American. But those records, I must have been about 7 or 8 when I heard those records, and I just couldn't get enough of it. It just sounded like the present to me. It sounded like the music of the present, even though maybe the records were from 10 to 20 years before, but the music spoke to me in a very special way. And couldn't really relate to it with my friends because my friends' parents didn't have those records. They didn't play them. Everybody was listening to the same kind of bubblegum pop that was on the radio. And but then, as I got older and I started to meet other musicians, started to find out, oh yeah, there are other people who were like checking out Wes Montgomery and George Benson and all these great guitar players, and started to see, oh yeah, there's a community out there that appreciates this stuff. It's not just me and my dad. And so I was able to end up going to music school in Berklee in Boston. Of course, they were just full of people from all over the world who had similar experiences being buzzed on jazz at an early age. And you start to realize, okay, you're not first of all, you're not alone in this world. Second of all, you're not just the hot shit kid from your school who's, the best guitar player of your class. You're competing with people from all over the world, and it was a very humbling experience, but also very inspiring, because it made you get better and made you listen to other things and meet other people. And this experience of meeting people from other countries is really immeasurable, because you grew up in a little city in New Jersey, and your frontiers are so small, really. And then you go to a big city, and they open wider, and then you go to a city where there are people from all over the world studying, and then you realize, okay, the world really is a big place. But curiously, all these people coming from all corners of the world to want to study jazz, which is a uniquely American art form. Of course, now jazz is all over the world. But it was a very enriching experience. The first jazz album I purchased with my own money was Giant Steps by Coltrane. I remember I had a meeting with a friend of my brother's. His father worked at Columbia Records, and he lived in my town. So I was like 15 or 16. He took me into his office one day, just to show me what it was like in a big music record label world. And it was an eye-opening experience just to go there and hear people talk about record sales and all this stuff. They're basically more tied to the pop music side of things. But he drew me in, and in the morning, and we had this, he introduced me to all the people. He introduced me to Teo Macedo, who was a great producer of many seminal jazz records. And then we had lunch together, and he stayed working, and I, took the subway and took the bus home. And I remember in Port Authority, there used to be a record store right next to the 1, 2, and 3 train, which doesn't exist anymore. And they had all these records in there. When I walked in, this Naima, this Gonna Be a Beautiful Ballad of Coltrane, was playing. And I was like, what is this? And I asked the guy. He said, oh, that's Coltrane. So I bought it, and I think it was like $9, the record, which was a lot of money for me at the time, but took it home, and I was just so proud, because my father didn't have that record. And he was more into the big band stuff and the early Miles stuff, and not the late 50s, early 60s, Coltrane kind of thing. I remember showing it to him, and he was impressed that I bought it, but he really didn't know what to make of it, especially Giant Steps. He was like, I don't understand what they're doing. I said, well, I don't either, but it's really cool. I want to know what they're doing, and I played the hell out of that record. It was really a turning point in my life. And then I had my own jazz band in high school. We had 2 horns and guitar, bass, piano, and drums. And we would try to play, jazz tunes. And we were kind of flying in the dark, because none of us were professional musicians. I had a guitar teacher who was a really great guitarist, but he wasn't. He worked more like as a pop guitarist than a jazz guitarist. So he taught me a lot of jazz harmony and chord scales and stuff. But it was just something we wanted to do, to just play jazz and try to take things off of records and try to figure out, how to do it, what they were doing. It seems still kind of mysterious to us. I mean, there was a theory, we all knew music theory at the time, but how to turn that into something on an instrument that sounded like jazz, that feeling. It took a long time to get that happening when you're growing up in the suburbs. And let's see, my career goals when growing up. Well, I had no real idea what I would do as a musician. I just knew that I wanted to do it. I was good at other subjects. I always got good grades, but nothing buzzed me like music. I would come home from school, and first thing I would do is take out my guitar and just start playing it for hours. And then my mother would call me and say, time for dinner. And I realized, I didn't do my homework for English or social studies, whatever it was. And so after dinner, I'd have to work on this stuff, because my first thing was to go to the instrument, start playing, put on records, try to pick up licks, try to figure out what's going on. So I didn't really have any specific career goals, I guess. At that age, I was more just wanting to get better at playing jazz, and then decided that I would go to Berkeley. And when I got there, like I said, it was meeting people from all over the world. I lived in the dormitory the first year with 2 other roommates, and it's kind of in a crazy situation, away from my home from the first time. And And Boston was a cool environment to be in the 70s. And I think Boston has more colleges per capita, per square meter than any place in the world. There were students everywhere you looked, and a lot of places to play. It was hard to get paid to play in Boston because there were so many students playing for free. So it was a great environment to learn things in, but not so much to be a professional musician. But I remember the idea of just like starting my day and from 9 until 5, just studying music. It kind of blew my mind because I had like a music theory course in high school, and I would look forward to it every day. It was the one class that was just about music. But then you go to a music college and you're studying music all day, and you're studying all different kinds of music, and it just blew my mind. It was just incredible. I guess throughout the 4 years that I ended up staying there, I guess I did start to create some career goals, imagining that I would play in some big jazz band or be discovered by some jazz artist or launch my own jazz career. But in academia, you're kind of a little distant from the reality of the real music business, the real world. Uh, but it was an amazing experience, especially in terms of composition, because I didn't really have any kind of background in classical music, and I studied a lot of it when at Berkeley. I had this great teacher named Thomas Obo Lee, who unveiled the great mysteries of like Beethoven and Bach and Brahms and even Bartok and Weber and Stravinsky and Schoenberg, all this stuff that my parents didn't have these records in the house. They had a lot of jazz, which is great, but totally got into classical music there, which is ironic because Berkeley is not known as a classical music school, but this one great teacher instilled in me this love for this other art form. And somehow I knew they were somehow connected, especially the composers like Debussy and Ravel, and who influenced Gershwin a lot, whose music was played a lot in the jazz community. And I had no idea how I would use that in my life, what I would do with it to make a living once I got out of there. But, I just studied and wrote tons of music and played as much as I could. And after I graduated, I moved back to New Jersey, to Nutley, the city I lived in, about 10 miles away from New York City. And I was like, okay, now what? What am I going to do? So, of course, right away, I got some job like as a truck driver or messenger, or, something to make some money while I was playing. I was playing in an original rock band at the time. We were trying to get a record deal and that whole bit. But I was also playing with jazz musicians and getting better. And, it's funny, when you're in school, you learn all the technical stuff, but you don't really understand the essential things like grooving and playing in time and, listening to things you as a mature musician, you start to acquire. It takes a long time for those things to sink in when you're just studying them in an intellectual capacity in school. So I credit my years at Berkeley to giving me all this information, but it was really the musicians that I played with in the 80s that I started working with, where I made the most growth as a musician, learning how to feel things and play things. And then after about a couple of years, I started playing in wedding bands, which a lot of musicians do because, it pays well for a short amount of time and it's better than driving a truck. And that was a great experience because, most of the wedding bands that I played in had some of the best musicians in the tri-state area playing in them. And, I remember there was even a scene in Clint Eastwood's movie Bird about Charlie Parker and the gang going to play a bar mitzvah in Brooklyn, which was, I thought, a great thing to show that, even consecrated jazz musicians sometimes do gigs to make money or to get by. But in doing so, one of the things that it taught me was how to respect stylistic considerations, like, of course, playing bebop is much harder than playing a pop song. But playing a pop song authentically, depending on which style it's in, requires a certain attention to detail, attention to the sound of your instrument, attention to the vocabulary that you use when you're improvising, and where you place the beat. All these things where, I really learned on the job with these great musicians that I met in the tri-state area. And at the same time, there's always a part of a wedding band where you're playing jazz in the beginning, or bossa novas, it's the people coming in before they're paying attention to the bands. And so you had a chance to hone your jazz chops a little bit. And then I would start to create my own jazz bands with musicians that just wanted to play jazz and write jazz music. And so I started to do that. And it's in 1985, I moved into Manhattan and lived there for almost 20 years until 2004. And there it was easier to meet other jazz musicians and play and go to jam sessions and network, which is a big thing, about being a musician. You can't just be good. You have to know people who are going to call you, who are going to do things and together. And I guess it must have been around the late 80s. Well, before that, in 85, I got called to play in Renaissance, this progressive rock, English rock band, which is the first really professional kind of music gig I did. And our first gig was at the Tower Theater in Philadelphia for 3,000 people. Before that, I played parties for like 200 people or bars. All of a sudden, I was playing in a concert hall. And that was a great formative experience, even though it wasn't in jazz, but it was a demanding thing because I had to play bass, 12-string guitar, 6-string guitar, and sing background vocals. And I had like 5 days to put the thing together. Coincidentally, this October, I'll go back to the United States to play the farewell tour of Renaissance. The band's calling it quits after more than 50 years. It'd be like 55 years of the band's existence, but I entered in 85. And then a few years later, I started playing in this band called Bob's Diner, which was a kind of a jazz fusion band that got signed to DMP Records with some friends of mine from New Jersey, as well as Bob Smith, who was the leader of the band, the trombone player. And we started to play a lot of clubs in New York and festivals, jazz festivals, and Syracuse Jazz Festival in particular was a great one. And we had this, we even played at the World Trade Center before, of course, it was blown apart. And we had this series, the CD 101, the radio station would run on Tuesdays. And many artists came to play with us there. Everyone from Bob James to Dave Samuels. I'm trying to think of who else. Little Jimmy Scott. And there I met Toninho Horta, the great Brazilian jazz guitarist, composer. There I met Astrid Gilberto, the great Brazilian singer, the woman who had the first hit with the Garota de Ipanema, Girl from Ipanema. And that started a 10-year period of my life where I started to play in her band and play with half the band were Brazilian musicians, half were American musicians. And that's where I really learned the subtleties of playing Brazilian rhythms the right way and with the right feel. And that was an amazing experience. We traveled all over the world. We went to Japan many times, Indonesia, Europe. We played a lot in England, of course, in the United States and California and New York. And to be a singer, a lead singer together with her. She did my debut as a lead singer in her band. We would do duets together, which gave me a lot of confidence because I'd sung before a little bit in bar bands and stuff, but this was like for real with people listening, and it was a great experience. And she was a really inspiring person to work with because, first of all, she helped to invent a style of music. The bossa nova was basically invented between she and her ex-husband João Gilberto, and it was just a chance for me to get closer to this music that I remembered from being as a child. And so I played with her from 1991 to 2001. And she sadly passed away last year, but she was a formative experience. I mean, and from there, I started to meet other jazz musicians and other Brazilian musicians, especially who lived in New York. It's ironic that when I lived in New York, I played a lot of Brazilian music and sang in Portuguese because I was the gringo. I was the American who could sing in Portuguese, even though I had a terrible accent, but the Americans didn't know that. And the ironic thing was when I moved to Brazil, I started to play a lot of Brazilian music and sing, and it was like people were like, "Okay, it's kind of cute, this American gringo singing in Portuguese, but play something from your land." And then I ended up becoming more of an American music expert in Brazil through these 20 years that I've been here, because I can play jazz and blues, pop, whatever it is, with a certain, real accent, both singing and playing. And I don't play that much Brazilian music, although I do, when I make arrangements of things, I do use a lot of Brazilian influences in the arrangements I do, because it kind of tells my story of living in both countries for a long time. Let's see, any older musician who gave me advice? Well, Astrid was an older musician who gave me advice, and her advice was that I should get up front and sing, and that's something that I do a lot here. All of the shows that I play on my own in Brazil, I've done. I'm a singer as well as a guitarist. I was able to play for 2 years in the band of Ivan Lins, the great Brazilian pianist and singer-songwriter, with marvelous musicians in his band, and got even deeper into the Brazilian pocket and Brazilian feel here. And here in Brazil, I do a lot of tribute concerts of all different artists, from Ray Charles and Nat King Cole, Cole Porter, until Elton John, Tears for Fears, whatever that there is. But I present my own versions of these classic tunes. It's not just like a cover band. It's like something I do where I bring elements of jazz and world music into the arrangements to make people see these songs in a different fashion, to make them see them as an extension of my personality, of my life here. And advice I would give to younger musicians to keep them encouraged. Well, it's kind of a discouraging time in music, because, with the advent of pirating, people don't make so much money off of recordings as they used to. Practically nothing, to tell you the truth. Streaming pays so much less than record labels even paid, and they paid poorly to begin with. So my advice to someone who's starting out is to have some other means of income, if you can, to help you get through it, because just trying to survive as a musician is really, really tough, tougher than it ever has been. I don't mean to discourage people if they really have the passion to play music and want to play music, but it's I remember people lamenting the fact that the 55 bar closed a few years ago, and I also lamented it, because it was an amazing place. But when you think about it, it really kind of ended up paying the same thing to musicians 30 years after it was there. And the situation of musicians in the world is really hasn't been advanced much. Musicians unions don't help. It's really kind of a sad state of affairs for solo musicians, unless you're lucky enough to have some kind of media exposure, or you become a big YouTube influencer. But this technology we have today, we didn't have in our day. So before, I would tell people, "Oh, go to study in a fancy music college." And today, all you really need is a great private teacher and a high-speed internet connection, and you have access to all of the greatest music that was ever played and written. And we didn't have that back in our day, 30, 40 years ago. But if you're focused and you love what you do, you'll keep doing it, because you have to, because it's in your blood, it's in your soul, And I would also say to them to keep track of all the people you grow up with, because those same people that you started playing with will be those people who will in the future employ you, or have a project for you, or you will call them. It's kind of a lateral move. Everybody goes up at the same time. And I'm going to be releasing an album of my original pop music this year. And I've been starting to release videos that I made during the pandemic of my crazy arrangements of pop songs. And you can see all that. I see on the bottom of the screen my Instagram, Mark Lambert _music. If you'd like to write to me, I'd be happy to respond to you, or if anybody has any questions. Music is something you do, I think, until your last breath. I can't ever imagine retiring. This is a life's work, and I've been lucky to be able to travel the world playing it and meet great musicians. and continue to grow and find my own voice. And it's just something you have to do because it's in your blood. And I've been blessed that I have this opportunity. And well, I guess that's about it. I want to thank Gail Boyd again for this opportunity to speak with you today. And good luck with you. And if, like I said, if anybody wants to stay in touch, you can drop me a line at Mark Lambert _music at Instagram. I also post my videos there, the work that I'm doing. And it's been a pleasure to have you here on my little talk. Thank you.